Good evening, everybody. Bonsoir, bienvenue, welcome. Also, of course, to our online audience. Good evening. Thank you so much for making time in your calendars. I know it's crazy times. We are very busy here, especially in the political Berlin sphere. Thank you so much, distinguished guests, for making the time. Excellencies, and of course, guests from the embassies from Cameroon, Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Togo, and Tunisia. Members of the German Parliament, and of course you, the experts from academia, from the industry, and also from entrepreneurship. Thank you again for being and for attending tonight. It's great to see you and to have you here for a lively discussion tonight. As mentioned, we are here, and I warmly welcome you for our symposium, when we talk about how to enhance the access to finance for African SMEs via Diaspora remittances. And one thing is to talk about it, the other thing is really to look into the facts and figures, to see, of course, the empirical insights, especially now with the WIDU project that we're going to listen to today. WIDU.africa, just to give you a little introduction, has recently concluded the first very exciting project phase, and it's a milestone in their journey, and we want to look into that, of course, today. What does it mean? What facts and figures are important when it comes to job creation across the African continent, when it comes to promoting the private sector? And as I said, it's one thing to talk about it, to have a lively discussion. The other thing is really to look into the nitty-gritty. And for that, we are here. We want to hear about WIDU's RIE, the Rigorous Impact Evaluation. What does that mean, right? That's the big question. We're going to listen to that in a second. But for the official opening remarks and the welcome remarks, I welcome now the director of the Africa II Directorate at the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development here in Berlin. Please give him a round of applause. Philipp Knill is with us. Thank you.
Yes, good evening to everybody here in Berlin and all around the world where people join us for this important symposium tonight on the rigorous impact evaluation of the WIDU project. Now you could say, well, one other project. Let me quickly explain why we think there's a special framework and a special thing about it. We are living in times of multiple crises. It's about the climate issue, it's about conflicts, it's about migration, and many other things. We are very much looking at find good ways to work together with different stakeholders and groups to face these challenges. And we are very much about finding good ways of cooperation across borders and with different interest groups on board. So there actually WIDU comes into the game, where we work with Diaspora in Germany, in other European countries, with partners in African countries, and where we jointly try to mobilize technical knowledge, ideas, innovation, finance, and finally also, let's say, a mechanism of working together to promote jobs, to promote economic development, and cross-border exchange of ideas and working together. So that's the special thing about WIDU, and there's a very concrete framework which has now run for a few years, and it has shown first results. We would want to look at it. Actually, we are at the crossroads with the WIDU project. And the good thing is that there's a good basis, as we can hopefully see later on. But now different stakeholders need to come together to really scale it up. And these will need to be African countries, people in Africa. This will be the diaspora in Germany and other European countries. This needs to be the private sector, the finance sector, be it in Europe or in Africa. And this needs to be, for sure as well, the German government and other European countries. So we try to build up such an alliance around these goals. And let's see, first of all, what is really the impact we have reached so far, and then maybe also let's have a discussion on how we can take the good things forward and maybe change those things that haven't worked yet. It's a pleasure actually tonight to have African embassies from all 6 countries here. I think the ambassador from Ethiopia is still to arrive. We also have colleagues from all over Europe, from other European countries there. We have for sure the many diaspora organizations and people here in the room and in online. It's a great pleasure to have you here, to see you here, and to work together. Thanks for being here, and let's have a good exchange, and hopefully a very good way forward as well after this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knill. Thank you for these opening remarks, and I warmly welcome from the Member of the Parliament, Mr. Christoph Herrmann, who's also joining us tonight. Thank you very much for attending and for making time in your busy calendars. All right, as I mentioned, WIDU, promoting business ideas in Africa. What does it mean? What are the facts and figures? If you have questions, please note them down, because now we are coming into the numbers, the facts and the figures when we look into the study, and later on we do have time for your questions. So if there is something that keeps you busy on your mind, where you agree or disagree, you know, later it's all about your questions as well. So I kindly invite you to note it down and to really come forward later on. All right, now coming to the main results of the study, when we talk about the rigorous impact evaluation, I welcome the Managing Director and Founder and Senior Impact Evaluation Consultant at Impact Loop. Please also give her a round of applause. Manuela Günther is with us. The stage is all yours. You have the pointer, you have a microphone here, number... Just for me to figure this out. Yes. These 2 arrows, below and above. Wonderful. Stage is all yours. Thank you.
Yeah. Can you all hear me? I'm really not used to a microphone. This is rather an interesting experience, but it is an absolute pleasure to be here with you tonight. And as I'll take you through the slides, you know, some of it is quite figure heavy, so I apologize for that in advance. Please, as was said, note down your questions. We will come back to them. If there's something really pressing, please raise your hand, but just for the interest of time, I would want to go through it sort of like in one fluid go. So that's not quite working. Yes, that would do it. Great. So, as we obviously have people here from different backgrounds, I'm going to walk you a little bit through what WIDU is, just to bring us all back to the same page. And to do that, I just want to give a background, and again, people with different interests and backgrounds here. But one thing that we know is creating jobs in middle-income countries is one of our main priorities. We also know that most people in middle-income countries and lower-income countries actually work in what we call small micro SMEs. And that's why WIDU focuses on those to start with. We also know that access to finance in general is an issue. I mean, there's been a myriad of studies on this, access to finance. The latest one we're citing here, the World Bank, and there's an IMF study that says, in general, small and micro enterprises lack about 40% of sort of like financing needs. So just to set the stage, we also know that microcredits, there's been, again, a longitude of studies on this, actually have mixed effects, and we'll come back to this and why it's therefore so important to bring in a novel approach. Then again, coming from a different angle, we have remittances. We know that remittance flows outside of development projects are flowing to, in this case, African countries. So why don't we use them productively? And so this is the idea again, and we know that remittances can have a positive effect as a alternative financing means, and especially if used towards investments, productive investments. And then lastly, we also know that oftentimes when you look into this context of micro and small enterprises in low-income, in middle-income countries, you also know that coaching isn't necessarily available to everyone. But yet again, we know that coaching, business coaching, much better. Okay, is this better? Yeah. That coaching really helps to sort of like hone in entrepreneurial skills, which then again helps for business growth. So having set the background and giving you the context, I'll just give you a brief overview of WIDU. I'm sure you had a look at the website and you've had a look at information material, and again, different backgrounds here. But the idea is obviously to link together diaspora, remittances, and then with entrepreneurs on the ground. So as you can see here, how they do that is the diaspora member in Europe selects the entrepreneur, so it's not the other way around, selects the entrepreneur, invites them to the platform, and then together they set up a business investment plan. So you see in the slides behind you sort of like how that works. So the entrepreneur themselves gives 25%, the diaspora gives 25%, and then there's a matched grant, sort of like once they've gone through the whole process of coaching and sort of like auditing and verifying every receipt, they then get the matched finance. So you've got this whole package of sort of like people being sort of like invited to the platform. As we said, coaching, matched financing, and this matters as we walk you through the study, just to provide as a background. And so the total matched finance, so like the 100% of it all, can be between 500 to 5,000 euros. Right. So we wanted to know what's the impact of, and we're just looking within the study of the original WIDU grant. There's some other grants that we're just going to ignore for now. So what is the impact of the original WIDU grant on employment, business performance, and knowledge increased, as well as indirect effects? So how do we study this? And I'm now going to have to be a bit technical, but I'm sure you've heard of randomized control trials as they're run in medicine. And so people much smarter than me got a Nobel Prize for this in 2019, where they introduced a randomized control trial for testing what works and what doesn't work in development projects. And so you see this in the slide behind you. The idea is that ideally we've got a random group, so in this case WIDU applicants, who would have been ideally randomly allocated into those that receive the WIDU treatment and those that don't. Now, however, that would be the ideal scenario that we oftentimes have in academia. In applied policy or development policy, that's oftentimes not the case. So this is a real case scenario. And so obviously we, in the design stage, worked very closely with the WIDU team and realized very quickly if we were to do that, if we were just to take those that applied to the WIDU platform and were successful and then randomly allocated into those that actually get the coaching and the matched finance and those that don't, we'd have some really unhappy people who wouldn't get the treatment, right? So it was very clear that we couldn't do that. So we had to find an alternative approach to this, and this is where what we call a quasi-experiment comes in. This is the infographic that I show you below, where what we do is we realize we can't entirely randomly allocate, but we can measure sort of like the outcome, the difference in outcomes in the beginning, and then follow them over time and see what's the difference in outcome at the end minus the difference that we had in the outcome in the beginning. And that's called what's a difference in difference approach. So what we did, therefore, and we complemented this with qualitative data to not just understand sort of like the quantitative impact, but also the how behind it. We focused for this on the 2 pilot countries where most of the WIDU projects have taken place, in Ghana and in Cameroon. So to do that, we again, technical. We did some power calculations to know what's actually the sample size that we need, and we obviously follow them over time. So in this case, we have what we call a baseline, midline, and endline. So baseline, ideally before anything of the WIDU support system has taken place. So before the first coaching visit, I'll explain a little bit more what these two different groups look like in a second. Midline, sort of like after the first and second coaching visit, but before the WIDU grant was paid out. And at the end line, sort of like to really understand what are the longer running effects 6 months after the grant was paid out. So in total, what you see here in the baseline, we collected data on nearly 800 entrepreneurs. And then unfortunately, as oftentimes is the case, not everybody wants to continue, being interviewed. And so obviously we had a little bit of attrition. And so in total, we still have what we call a panel data of about 1,500 entrepreneurs across these 3 different stages in time. As I said, we complemented that with in-depth interviews, key informant interviews, focus group discussions to really sort of like dig deeper into the how behind it. This is a bit more complicated here, but the idea again is we have this pool of Africans, and these are our population of interest in this case. And this is why when we couldn't allocate them entirely randomly, we still had to go, well, they need to be as similar as possible. We can't just select as a comparison group any random sort of like small-scale entrepreneur in the neighborhood. They have to be similar in that they have the connections to the European diaspora, right? Maybe they have a motivational difference. Maybe they have other differences that we have to take into account. So what we did is we said, okay, we look at the pool of applicants that applied to WIDU, were invited by a diaspora member, but then obviously our treatment group is very clear. They got approved into the process. Our comparison group, we decided specifically not to take those that were rejected, but rather those that hadn't just entirely completed the application for reasons unknown. There was a large pool of that. And so we then said, okay, so they're not too different. The only thing is they didn't entirely complete the application and it's been lying idle for 3 to 6 months. And so then what we did is we followed them. You see that here. So between May, and this has been going on for a really long time, this study. So between May 2021 and August 2023, we followed them. So we followed them through the baseline. You see here sort of like first coaching, investment of the private funds, meaning the entrepreneur's money and the diaspora's money, second coaching visit, grant decision, right? You see they all. And unfortunately, as it sometimes happens, we do have slight limitations, and I'll come to that in a second, but there is a slight time difference between our treatment group and our comparison group, which we take into account in our analysis stage. And so just to give an overall set of the limitations, and so as I said, it's not a randomized control trial, so it's not purely based on randomization, which would eradicate selection bias, a common issue in evaluations to the extent of the most extent possible. So here we still have some selection bias present potentially, which again through our difference and difference analysis and by controlling for other variables where we see in the baseline where there might be differences between the two groups, we then control for them through our analysis and we take them into account. As I said, the time pass is ever so slightly longer, so just about 16 months between the baseline and the end line, between comparison group and treatment group, 14 months for the treatment group. And then what we have is attrition, again, very common where, there might have been a lack of willingness to talk to us 3 times. And so hence you saw between 800, we had interviewed just under 800 in the baseline, and then we went down to just under 500 at the end line. Are there any questions so far that are really pressing before I go on and we finally look a little bit at the results? Good. Right, so to understand the results and put them into a setting, we need to understand also what were the differences between these and what did WIDU applicants actually look like. So WIDU was set out to sort of like look at the bottom of the pyramid, targeting informal and small-sized businesses. The baseline data shows, who's applying to WIDU. That's by and large the case. They do sort of like overperform on a certain set of indicators, but by and large, they are informal, small-sized businesses with on average 3.5 workers. Sort of like nearly all of them had a business at baseline, but as I said, very small. Only just under 40% of them were actually tax registered, still more than what the national averages are for these two countries, but still very little when you look at it, so still very largely informal. Only about half of them rated their financial capabilities as either good or very good, so again, a clear need for sort of like coaching. And the majority did not keep a record of their employees and hours worked, or only did so mentally. Only over 30% or so kept a record of their income and expenditure, which obviously is very much needed if you want to know what your profit is and your revenue is. So the basics of running a business, basically. And again, this just shows the coaching needs. Again, very few of them, 34%, actually had received business coaching in the past. And only about 26% of those had actually received a loan in the past, of which a lot of them informally, sort of like from family and friends. Most of them, half of them, had received remittance or so in the past, which makes sense given our target group. Yeah, and so then some differences, again, which are important to understand for the results, differences between our treatment and comparison group. So our comparison group was actually doing a little bit better in the beginning. And so what we see is, and this is why they didn't go through with their application sometimes, because they didn't need it as much as those that were then sort of like approved into the WIDU project, right? So if they had a business, they actually had slightly higher profit, the comparison group. They were a little bit more educated. They maybe just had one occupation, whereas the treatment group had multiple occupations, showing that they're just economically a bit more vulnerable. The treatment group had lower household income. And as I said, the treatment group's businesses were younger, fewer were tax registered, and less of them actually kept that sort of like record keeping that we mentioned before. This is where I bombard you with numbers. So by and large, WIDU creates a job. So we look at, here we look at the overall data, here we look at Cameroon, here we look at Ghana, and you see obviously country-wise differences. Remember that these businesses are very small to start with, and that at the baseline, so at the very beginning, the comparison group was doing better. So they had slightly more employees than our WIDU-supported entrepreneurs. And that reversed at the end line, right? So WIDU changed this. Actually, the treatment group had more employees at the end. Also, more of the treated entrepreneurs than the comparison entrepreneurs saw an increase in their employees, whilst fewer saw a decrease. So whilst maybe perhaps the expectation was that every entrepreneur and every business would grow, that's not necessarily what we saw. What we also saw is that WIDU supported a bit of a buffer to those that otherwise would have maybe shrank or let go of people. We also saw that those businesses that reduced employees, if they were part of our treatment groups or part of WIDU, they reduced fewer. And as I said, there's country-wise differences. And you see this very clearly from the chart, right, where Cameroon was sort of like having a higher employee growth amongst the treated, so amongst our WIDU-supported entrepreneurs. And then this is sort of like where we actually have something to say about causal inference, so impact. This is our difference in difference analysis. And that one showed that we have a positive employee growth of 0.8. And if you remember again that we have very small businesses, that amounts to about a 30% increase in employees. However, and this is where the timing comes in, and this is also why we obviously looked at these processes over time, we didn't find that at the midline. So these employee effects hadn't quite materialized at that point yet. They only became statistically significant at the end line. And this also fits sort of like a larger body of literature that we have on what actually works in terms of access to finance and its effect on employment in lower and middle income countries. And so there actually we find that, as I said before, microfinance has mixed effects oftentimes, that microcredits don't necessarily have a positive effect or mixed effect only on employee growth, whereas here we see a positive effect. And so that matters, especially in that context. Right, bear with me. So by and large, our results are that WIDU increases revenue and profit. However, as you can see here immediately from the charts, it's a bit more complicated than just employee growth, right? So what we see is, like if you again look at the overall chart here, we have business turnover at the top and then business profit at the bottom. They behave very similarly. They also behave very similarly between treatment and comparison. So what we do see is a bit of a kink, right? Where first it goes up, and then it goes down. However, both turnover and profit remain higher for the treatment group, even though they started off lower, remembering that our comparison group was outperforming in the beginning the treated. And so what we find, and we'll go to that in the next slide, is actually external factors really influence this. Again, we find large countrywide differences, where in this case actually changes are a bit more positive in Ghana than in Cameroon. Right, so what we see here is a lot of them were influenced by inflation, and negatively so. And this is why we see time-wise, right, sort of like with everything that's going on, the war in Ukraine, inflationary tendencies, etc. This is why we saw sort of like a higher increase from baseline to midline and then a bit of a kink, even though the difference in difference analysis shows very clearly that our results in terms of positive increase in both turnover and profit are statistically significant for the treated. And so it amounts to about 850 euros in revenue and just under 300 euros in profit, which is actually quite a large amount in, not in the European context, but in the context of these countries. And so what's also really important to know here, and we see also a statistically significance indicated by the asterisk increase at the end line rather than the midline, is that these effects normally materialize over time. And so there's other studies that show that it might take up to 5 years and longer for jobs and profits to materialize. So given that we've only followed them for up to 15 months, this actually indicates something already, right? So great. We looked at a myriad of outcomes. Obviously, you're getting a very selected picture here. We looked at a lot of different things. One of the things that we also looked at was the income that they derive from the business. And so again, we see a similar pattern as we saw before, slightly more smoothed out, where we look at the first graph on the top at the average income derived from the business. And then we also look at the percentage or the share of the income from the business to overall income that the entrepreneur earns, to see if sort of like the percentage share has changed. And so again, we see overall WIDU increases the income of the entrepreneur, slight countrywide differences. So we see an effect size of just under 100 euros for the last 3 months, sort of like 3-month average of the business income, and a 11% increase in the income share. And again, the difference in difference analysis shows that these are statistically significant and actually already at the midline. So these effects materialize a bit faster than perhaps employee growth, profit, and revenue. However, as you can see, smaller in size. I would love some water, but never mind. Right, so what we also looked at is sort of like secondary outcomes. So we looked at, right now, as we just said, sort of like main outcomes in terms of employee growth, income, revenue, profit. We also wanted to know what are the changes in knowledge and behavior. Thank you. So as we said before, there are 3 different coaching sessions, and coaching is an essential part of the WIDU process, support process. So overall, the entrepreneurs rated the business coaching received by WIDU as very highly. We measured sort of like knowledge increase. Thank you. We measured the knowledge increase on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is sort of like expert knowledge, and you see that in the table, where change, and so again, statistical significance is indicated by asterisks, that are 3 being the highest. That we actually have a range of sort of like a range of knowledge increase in terms of business operations, leadership, management, you name it, the highest being in financial literacy and bookkeeping. We also looked at sort of like whether the business coaching had an effect on business performance, and we did find some correlations, but they weren't entirely strong. We'll come to them further down the line, whether we did have strong sort of like correlations on business performance. And again, putting this sort of like in a wider context, we actually know that not everybody retains this kind of knowledge that they get, and that makes sense, right? So oftentimes the effects of coaching get watered down the line. There's some mixed effects, and especially mixed effects of coaching. Whilst coaching is obviously incredibly important for business growth, there's mixed effects regarding coaching on employment, right? And so again, we have to put that into context. A few studies even found adverse effect. We didn't find that. We found positive impacts, but we'll come to that further down the line. Here we look at some further changes in sort of like the knowledge of the entrepreneurs, specifically business understanding. So just to put at the background here, WIDU uses something called the business model canvas that has different sort of like components, and so we measured that. One of them is, for example, the understanding of customers, understanding of communication channels used with customers, understanding of competitors. And so what we see is that the treatment group had slightly better self-rated understanding along all of these. And you see this sort of like, right, I'm not going to read out all the percentages here, but you see sort of like the increase here. What we also see, however, is that some of the comparison group also saw increases. Could be different reasons for that. One of them that obviously we asked them these questions 3 times, and so they might have caught up about, you know, the fact that maybe this is something they should learn about. So unfortunately, that can be a side effect of running that kind of survey. We also, amongst many other things, looked at financial capability. And here we observe very clearly sort of like positive changes in self-assessed financial capability. And they're also in this case positively related to business performance. And so to bring that a bit more in, hone that a bit more home. So respondents who rated their financial capability as good or very good generated much more in business turnover than those that rated their capability as poor or very poor, right? And this was statistically significant. We also see that entrepreneurs with higher self-rated financial capability had higher profits. We do that by sort of like running marginal effects, keeping everything else as constant. I'm not going to bore you with, to the economists of us, I'm sure you get what I'm talking about. To the rest of us, I will not go into detail. And we did the same for income, and again find that financial capability really matters, obviously, for running a business and for generating better business performance. And we obviously see that WIDU increased the financial capability of those that were part of its project. We also looked at behavior. We looked at many different behaviors, one of them being record keeping and tax registration. As we said in the beginning, most of our entrepreneurs are informal, meaning they're not tax registered. And here we see, again, very much more so even than before, we see a very clear change within the treatment group, but actually nothing really happened within the comparison group. So this is where we see really, okay, before it was a bit muddled maybe, some of the comparison group also had some increase in knowledge. Here we see very clearly they by and large remained at the number of the share of tax registration, whereas our treated group really increased. What we also see, right, so you see that here, tax registration, what you also see is record keeping. So both for record keeping of employees, sort of like how many they have, hours worked, etc., and record keeping of income and expenditure increased much more for those that were part of the WIDU process than those that were not. All of this, again, is statistically significant. We also wanted to obviously understand what are indirect effects, positive and negative. And so we looked at this through the survey. We also looked at this through qualitative interviews. And so by and large, we found sort of like 3 levels of indirect effects. One being sort of like what we call the regional, being on the community level or village level. That came out mostly through the interviews we had with coaches, entrepreneurs. We didn't ask that, unfortunately, in our survey, lesson learned. What we did ask in the survey is sort of like related to the business ecosystem, so suppliers, customers, what were the changes there, and then also on the what we call the household or personal level, and this mostly refers to access to nutritious food, healthcare, quality education, and so walking you through these levels. On the regional level, the interview sort of like suggested that WIDU had a positive effect because it had sort of like, an increase in revenue, profit meant that oftentimes the businesses or the suppliers around them were also benefiting from this. Obviously what we see here as well, and all of this is rated just for your understanding on a scale of 1 to 10, again with 10 being the highest. And so what you see then here, p-value meaning statistically significant, the asterisk meaning it is statistically significant. And then obviously you see, as I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, sort of like the increase. And we see very clearly across a board of different indicators that our treated were outperforming our comparison group here. So when it comes to the number of business suppliers, the number of customers, the relationship, the rating of the relationship with the customers, sort of like on the business ecosystem level, the household level, as I said, education, healthcare, access to food, we see a fairly good increase. And also when it comes to sort of like more soft skills, sort of like their social standing in the community, which makes sense, right? If you run a business and, sort of like people around you see that business increase in size and revenue, people will come to me more for advice oftentimes. But we also see sort of like a reversal effect of the likelihood, and again, we don't know if they will migrate or not, but we can ask them about their intent to migrate to other African countries or to Europe, and then we see a slight decrease in their likelihood to do so. We also see sort of like as indirect effect the decision-making power of women, youth in the household, in the communities increase. And this was sort of like triangulated with qualitative interviews and showcasing us that as well. We'll come a little bit more to gender effects now. So first of all, and many of you probably know this, women entrepreneurs unfortunately oftentimes fare worse than male entrepreneurs. There's many different obstacles that female entrepreneurs face. One of the things, and this is also reflected in our survey data that we collected, we see their businesses are oftentimes smaller in size, operate more in the informal sector, have less formalized administrative processes, meaning record keeping, have lower average business value and are less profitable at the start than their male counterparts. What's really positive is that nearly about, 40 to 50%, 40% of our survey respondents are females. So in participation in WIDU, so we obviously ran it's a probit model to see the likelihood of being included in the WIDU process. What are the socioeconomic characteristics, for example, associated with being included in the program, and we see that being female is one of them. So WIDU actually sort of like positively invites women to participate. And then when we ran a regression analysis to understand sort of like changes, what are the drivers of changes in employees and profit at the end line, so it's towards the time, we see that whilst being a female, as I said in the beginning, had what we call a negative coefficient, so had a negative correlation with business performance, that was no longer the case at the end line. Meaning the negative effects that female entrepreneurs encounter were actually neutralized. So they were no longer statistically significant at the end line. Meaning they're no longer, it provided them a buffer. It didn't reverse it, but it provided a buffer, it neutralized some of the negative obstacles that women entrepreneurs encounter. Also, something that's really interesting is that we actually found that at the end line, not at the beginning, but at the end line, female-led businesses actually had a higher profit than their male counterparts. And so, again, putting some of the qualitative insights here in case, obviously, and we've heard all of violent backlash, so sometimes also, and this only came out through quantitative interviews, sometimes obviously that can change a little bit the position of women in the household. And so when they earn more money, we didn't find many effects of this. It was mentioned that it can happen, but that usually within the household, as I said before, indirectly, it increases their standing. And because it has many different positive indirect effects, oftentimes even when the WIDU grant went to a female entrepreneur, they said the male entrepreneur could sort of like in the household see the positive effects of it and were therefore okay with it. How are we doing? Are we still okay? Can we go further? Great. So we also, this is a lot of text for you. So we have some additional learnings. So one of the things, obviously, we looked into many, many different things. One of the things that we wanted to understand as well is what are the drivers of some of these changes that we see. So first of all, and I mentioned this before, we looked into why the comparison group actually not participating in WIDU, and we did that through the survey by running different regression analysis. We also did that by interviewing entrepreneurs that were not included in WIDU. And so one of the things, as I said before, is they don't need it as much. So hence the motivation isn't as strong to participate. Second, so now looking sort of like at regression analysis and looking at what are the drivers of change. As we said before, business formalization really matters in terms of employee growth, but also in terms of business performance. So this is something that WIDU should stress, and we come to that also in the recommendations. As I said before, record keeping has a very positive effect on business performance and on employee growth. Financial capability, as mentioned before, especially when rated really high, has a positive effect on business performance. The maturity of the business obviously also mattered. As we said in the beginning, most of them had a business to start with. And the maturity, sort of like older businesses, although there was a threshold of about 7 years, tended to be more profitable and had more employee growth, and generated higher income for their business owners, which I think makes sense. Location mattered. So interestingly enough, rural areas, so oftentimes agricultural businesses tend to be larger, or maybe just a larger workforce, tended to generate more employees. So now I'm taking the last one back, whereas actually the manufacturing sector, and we ran a sort of like as a control, so the agricultural sector employed, so actually, sorry, I contradicted myself, realized I didn't contradict myself, and now I'm going back to my original statement that rural businesses sort of like have a larger workforce, and we see this also, but oftentimes have a lower income share for their entrepreneur. We also, again, many different things that we looked at. We looked at access to finance and remittances. Did the WIDU support system change this? Perhaps not surprisingly, but when we asked them sort of like, do they have a loan and have they had a loan in the last 6 months? There's a slight decrease in demand for loans amongst those that participated in the WIDU support system, as they were obviously getting alternative financing. However, we did find that towards the end there was a positive effect on access to formal loans, sort of like bank loans rather than informal loans for those that participated in WIDU, particularly in Ghana. So again, the financial systems in these two countries are very distinct. We also see that after the WIDU process, sort of like the likelihood of receiving remittances, although not the amount, was positively correlated with WIDU participation. And especially when they use them for business investments, we find that it positively affects employee growth. So maybe this is more interesting for some of you here, and if any of the people are here who participated in the focus group discussions, I thank you for your participation. So this is just a bit of a qualitative analysis here. We also ran several interviews with the diaspora and on top of the focus group discussion, but generally maybe just to give a picture of what are the importance of the role of the diaspora. So most, perhaps not surprisingly, but most entrepreneurs had a pre-existing relationship with the diaspora. We ran a similar study in Kenya where we actually quantified it, so about 3/4 of them were family members. And then obviously the diaspora fulfills different roles. So they're really important for sort of like the success in the application stage, and also they screen already. Obviously they invite the entrepreneur to the platform, so they already know who might be set up sort of like for more success, who do they want to work with, who do they trust. And so in that case actually help WIDU screen for sort of like the right applicants. They obviously during the application stage really play an important role, and we found that one of the reasons that the comparison group didn't complete the application sometimes was because they didn't get the same support from the diaspora, and really making sure, and sometimes with our daily calls of just saying, have you submitted your business investment plan yet? Have you done this and that? So daily follow-ups. Oftentimes they also help them really with sort of like filling out the application. Not all of them, but sometimes they did. And obviously they also act as advisors, sort of like during the, sometimes one of the feedbacks that we got is that at some point they didn't really know what was happening. So again, constant calls to the diaspora of what's happening, is my application gone through yet? They offer mental support, sort of like during the waiting period, that's what I was referring to. And then what we really found is the diaspora was very well aware of what was happening with the business. They knew how many employees they have. They knew what the turnover was. They knew what was happening. So they stayed very well aware of the whole process. One thing that we did find is that the level of involvement depended a little bit on the closeness. So are they a family member? So perhaps they dare to advise more when they are a family member than when they are not. And that the diaspora support is more perceived as an investment, which doesn't mean that they have to pay this back, but it's not perceived as a loan or a donation. It's an investment that the diaspora is sort of like graciously doing to support the entrepreneur. Yeah, many also say that potentially would have supported the entrepreneur without WIDU. However, WIDU gave them a concrete timeline, a concrete business plan, and really a means to scale this up. And a means to also sort of like make sure that they're protected. Right? If WIDU audited 3 times the coaches visited, but also checked that all the receipts were submitted. So a lot of them came back to us and said, look, this was a really good way to know that what our money went to was actually also invested in that way, like how it was promised. Right, we're nearly at the end. So I just wanted to recap a little bit again. So by transferring business knowledge and encouraging small-scale businesses to formalize operations, and through the matched entrepreneurial and diaspora investments, I have now lost my speech, we have seen that help? Excellent. We're back. We have seen that we have about a 30% job increase that happens about 6 months after the grant payout. We have seen an attributable impact in revenue and profit growth as well as business income growth. And we've seen that WIDU provided a buffer to those that otherwise would have downsized, and also provided a buffer to those that were going through external shocks, being inflationary shocks or other sort of like, external shocks. We've seen an increase in skills and such as financial capability and business knowledge. We've seen an increase in formalization, meaning tax registration, record keeping of both employees and income and expenditure. And we've seen indirect effects, especially on the community level, the household level, and the business ecosystem level, and that WIDU can neutralize some of the negative bias that female entrepreneurs encounter. So what are our recommendations? Now, it should be said here that this is a 3-year study, and we worked very closely with WIDU, so some of the more operational recommendations have been given along to them and were implemented. So I have to say the WIDU program was really, really good at this. So we're going to keep this a little bit more high level here. So one of the things, by and large, we didn't think a change to the target group is necessary because we very clearly see that they're reaching those with a financing and skills gap. We also saw that many entrepreneurs were very hesitant, and a lot of the diaspora here will very much testify to this, that entrepreneurs were hesitant to actually participate in WIDU initially due to trust issues and many quoting it too good to be true. And so one of the things, and again, a lot has happened already on the website through communication and through diaspora ambassadors, but one of the things was sort of like to increase the communication there to remedy and reduce these trust issues with the target group. And then one of the things that WIDU partially is already doing as well is sort of like have more specifically targeted grants. One of them could be to women. We saw that rural areas, so sector plays a role, so that could be targeted grants more towards the agriculture sector, for example, with a different grant amount. So we didn't look into, we also tested obviously the different grant amounts and whether that mattered. By and large, we actually had a very homogeneous grant amount, so therefore we couldn't tease out the effects as much as we wanted, because if you don't have enough variation in your data, there's not much you can do, unfortunately. But one of the things that through interviews and recommendations that came out is the grant amount could be increased, for example, after the second application, so in their second round. And obviously a lot of them recommended that the participating countries should be expanded. Perhaps not surprisingly, but obviously there's a large network of diaspora entrepreneurs and they wish to be interconnected much more across country, across sector, to really sort of like level up a little bit more of that learning, the soft skills and the knowledge transfer. Coaching, as we said, so we very clearly saw what worked and what had sort of like an effect on increased employee growth and business performance, and so obviously it matters to focus on financial capability, tax registration, record keeping, etc. And many mentioned that 3 coaching sessions weren't quite enough for them and they'd really like a follow-up coaching session. One of the things, and this is where I applaud WIDU, is that they actually asked for this impact study. So it was a novel approach and they really wanted to know what is the effect of this. However, as most of you know, a rigorous impact evaluation, we can't extrapolate now and say, is the same valid for Kenya? But rather what we find works within the context that we studied, which is Ghana and Cameroon. What we therefore have is sort of like a piece of, sort of like a piece of the mosaic of a larger puzzle, right? And so what we therefore need in order to really understand what works and what doesn't work in generating jobs is a much more systematic approach to rigorous evidence, right? And especially sort of like if we look at, and we'll probably talk about this in the panel, but for example, FCDO, the UK aid, and USAID are sort of like, they have a top-down system where they actually demand some of their pilot projects, a certain percentage, to be evaluated through rigorous impact evaluation. So in order to therefore then inform which projects get commissioned and which ones don't. And I think that this is very much needed here as well, because what we have was incredibly interesting, as I said, is one piece of the puzzle, not the overall picture of what really works to generate jobs across countries, across methods. One sort of like rather lower hanging fruit as well, as we said, is obviously have a follow-up study. We know that many of the effects only materialize based on a large body of literature after several years. And so one thing we could do is, for example, with the same cohort, have a follow-up after 2 years or so and see what are the effects in the longer run. Right, this is overall it, and I'm sure we'll have many questions and we'll get to those in the panel. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Manuela. This is the cleansing breath. Thank you so much. Most important question. Now stay with me, bear with me here on stage, because you will be part of the panel, of course. Where do we find a study to come back to all the facts and figures?
So right now we've got a rather long report we would like to publish as well in a journal. That will take time.
Okay.
So right now the study results are basically with WIDU.
Okay, so you'll find the information, all the slides at the WIDU homepage. Thank you so much. Okay, this is your seat here on the second from the left. May I introduce you to my panel in a second? So please come on stage and I do the introduction here in a second. Dr. Thomas Helfen will with me on stage. Dr. Olumide Abimbola here on the second chair. Rachel Makasi Skirpe is with us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Manuela, we know her already. And last but not least, Dr. Yabibal Valle. And I kindly introduce you in a second to our audience. So if you have any questions, as I mentioned before, note them down. We do have time afterwards for your questions, as it's going to be an open Q&A session. To your left-hand side with us is Dr. Thomas Helfen from the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Since July 2021, he has been the head of the Division Coordination of Operations in Africa and the African Union. And prior to that, he held positions as head of divisions of peace and security, disaster risk reduction, among many others, but that's just a glimpse of his CV. So thank you for joining us on this panel, Dr. Thomas Helfen. And we also have with us Dr. Olumide Abimbola. He is the founder and the director of the African Policy Research Institute, and his focus includes economic informality, trade policy, regional integration, and natural resources management. When looking into his CV, it was quite interesting to read that you have been working on trade and regional integration at the African Development Bank, working, for example, on the continental projects, really cross-border projects such as the Africa Visa Openness Index and the Africa Regional Integration Index, just to name a few, as well as your CV is also very long, but thank you, Olumide, for being here with us as well. Rachel is with us. Thank you so much for joining. You are a co-founder and project lead at Mango Development in Norway. You're joining us from Norway. And this is an organization that initiates and supports sustainable development projects mainly in Kenya, with a focus on entrepreneurial projects. What's your vision? I read about your vision, and it's beautiful to see that you really want to see rural families getting empowered through development of their talents, the skills, and the locally available resources. What that means, let's dive into that in a second, but thank you for being here, Rachel. Manuela, we heard a lot about you already. You're the managing director, as I mentioned, and founder of Impact Loop, and you're also a senior impact evaluation consultant. Thank you so much for the facts and figures that you've presented and for being back on the panel. And last but not least, with us is Dr. Yabibal Valle, joining us from the German Institute of Development and Sustainability. We all know it, IDOS. You are an economist specialized in development economies, econometrics, finance and macroeconomics, a lot of eco and a lot of facts and figures. And you're currently a senior researcher, as I mentioned, at the German Institute of Development and Sustainability in the finance team, and you are actively engaged when it comes to research and policy advice, of course, with financial empowerment. Thank you. Thank you all for coming and for joining us. Wonderful. So as I mentioned, our topic of the next hour, 45 minutes, is really how to enhance access to finance for African SMEs via diaspora remittances. We've just heard a lot about the to-dos and the WIDU's projects, and we will hear more about that in a second. But Rachel, as I mentioned, we want to hear from you, of course, when it comes to this bridge working and the cooperation between diaspora and local entrepreneurs. You are someone who is deeply involved in the engagement and to really engage the diaspora community as well when it comes to bridging the gaps, also through WIDU. When you were looking at the studies, with, in comparison, of course, with your experiences, what have you thought? Does it mirror your experiences, the study? And have you felt, oh yeah, check, I've experienced similar things?
Yes, thank you. Absolutely, yeah. I was checking all through, and most of the things actually really have been captured quite well. Because if I go back to what you said with the vision, that there are a lot of assets on the ground, and sometimes the diaspora are the ones who can see which they're familiar with the families. They can know who specifically can be funded, because you always meet people. I think most of the diasporans will agree with me when you're there. There are always people who come with ideas, and they want you to maybe support their business. And a lot of us have tried initially in supporting the businesses. Sometimes it's just a call shop somebody wants to make or something. But a lot of times they collapsed. After some years, you still get people wanting funding. But the game changer has really been the coaching. So I can really re-emphasize that I resonate with what has been shared, and the coaching is absolutely a game changer for this, based even on my experiences and with the WIDU. Interacting with the WIDU entrepreneurs, they also agree that this coaching is good for them, because sometimes we've been sending money and do this business. Sometimes it's them who share the idea, but it's just copied somewhere. And sometimes we are the ones who tell them, you can do this business, you can get into this. And we send the money, and then after sometimes it's not there, because we are assuming that everybody can do business. Yeah, everybody, we know business is not always so easy, but we always think that it's what we need to do, what they need to do, so that we can really see hope in not having to send remittances all the time. But now with this coaching, I think, based on experiences, it has made a very big difference. The businesses which I've seen, they've survived now much longer.
I want to go into that, because Rachel mentioned sometimes you have to have this personal commitment coming from the diaspora in daily calls, for example. Have you been on the same position? And also the question, why did you decide, of course, to support an entrepreneur? And maybe you can give us an insight, who did you support in that context with daily calls? Or maybe just, of course, with the financial resources?
Okay, I've supported a lot of entrepreneurs, also indirectly, because I'm based in Norway, and WIDU came to Norway fairly recently. So I have in the pipeline quite a number. We can only do 3 at a go, yeah. And so it's in the pipeline. But I have people I've supported through friends in Sweden and also in Germany, where I recommended because they had good ideas, and Germany was already doing it. And following up, it's doing quite well. And then the other ones that I have really helped to see through this process, there is one concrete one who is a young man in Kenya. He's doing a lot with baobab. So coming back to the local assets, he's been doing, using them to produce the flour and the oil, same as me, we're in the same industry, but he had an idea to scale up, but he didn't know where to get the funding, and WIDU came in, and now he's really shooting on with his business.
Wonderful.
So that's one of the concrete one. I could share many more, but I will just pass it.
Absolutely. And we do have, of course, later on the network session where you can spread all your good examples as well. Olumide, I'd like to come to you, because when we talk about challenges of the SMEs, now it sounds all very easy. You need coaching, and coaching is one of the key drivers, and then the whole thing flourishes. Is it that easy for SMEs in the African context, or what would you see? What is a main...
No, I'm kidding.
That is a short answer to my very specific question. No, but coming, as, of course, from your background as an expert, scaling up small and medium-sized enterprises in the informal sector through financing and coaching, where would you see what is the key driver to really tackle these challenges on the ground?
Thank you, and thanks for that introduction. You mentioned that I work on informality. I did. I wrote my PhD on that, so I can talk a lot about that if you want to hear about it. But to speak to your question, I mean, what I saw when I was doing research on informality, that's about 15 years ago now, match what you just described. So there are normally 2 main issues. No, sorry, there are a lot of issues, okay? But the first one of them, we can't really do much about as we. So you have the general macroeconomic environment in which everybody in the economy operates, right? So you have, inflation, eats away your profits. You have access to market issues that apply to pretty much everyone. You have currency exchange issues that everybody has to solve. So there are general issues that meet everyone, that affect everyone. But specifically for small firms, sometimes you can't even call them firms, the issues are, one, access to finance, and generally speaking, access to finance, even for bigger firms, is an issue in an African country. So if you look at Nigeria or Ghana, Nigeria, the monetary policy rate, so the base interest rate in the country is 19%, 18.75 at this point. In Ghana, it's about 29%. That means that before you start doing any business, you have to calculate that as part of the cost of doing business, right? But for a much smaller firm, which in many cases is not even registered, that door is not even open at all, right? So the people you go to for financings, normally family members, and if you're very lucky, your family member who lives outside of the country, so who might have a bit more to kick to you than what you would normally get from people living together with you. So access to finance is one. The second is coaching, which you said. But to give it a bit more context, in West Africa, the natural way of getting into business historically has been through apprenticeship. So trade and craft apprenticeship, you spend 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years learning a trade or a craft, and when you finish, by the time you finish, you don't just know how to actually do that trade or how to practice that craft. You also learn how to manage finances, how to manage a business, how to run a business in a way that doesn't collapse on you. This is something that is still there in certain crafts and trades, is still there, but for those who are not part of that, there's almost no way for them to learn these skills that you need to have in order to run a business. So those are kind of the key issues that I can think of at the moment. And I think those are also the issues that WIDU is addressing. I was going to open by saying that I hope this is not a love fest for WIDU, but I end up kind of doing that anyway.
Well, you mentioned that, but I have a question. I mean, the question now really is, does it need to be entangled, the coaching aspect, with the access to financial resources, or can it also go singularly? Or is the perfect match within that cooperation and the entanglement?
It depends. It depends on who the entrepreneur is. It depends on what's the trade they're involved in. It depends on all of that. But generally speaking, like the institution that I described, which is sort of a training school of sorts, the internship process gives you both, right? It gives you the training in the arts and craft. It gives you the training in money management, in financial management, in how to deal with credits, because in many cases, it's hard for you to trade in a market without, offering credits and also asking for credit. So how to manage all of that? So that institution bundles that together. So if you happen to have gone through that, and at the end of it, what you need is financing to actually start a business, then maybe you don't need the coaching. But I would imagine that many people need to have both together in order to make a success of it.
Thank you. Now we're money talks, of course. Yaviba, so I'm looking into you because you're the expert, of course, among many other things when it comes to access to financial services. And when we just listened to what Olumide was saying, that of course this approach of WIDU is an approach of success. How do you see that success of WIDU, and where do you see also, of course, maybe challenges when it comes to the support of SMEs and the support of financial resources through the diaspora?
Thank you. I think I agree with most of what he said. I think the biggest thing is to give access to finance, because firms in Africa and most developing countries, especially in Africa, they mentioned that the biggest obstacle to business is access to electricity, number one. Number two is access to finance. So it's according to World Bank study. So it is the biggest obstacle to business growth. And WIDU is exactly giving that.
But what makes it so special? Because access to finance, you know, that's a big buzzword again, and it can look in very different colors very differently, right? So there are so many different projects also giving access to finance. What is needed?
As I said, so, I mean, on the one hand, you know, you need the finance itself. So access to finance means access to having a bank account, and of course, not only having access to loan, you know, access to credit, external credit to run the business. And now WIDU is giving this through matching on the one hand, and through the Diaspora. So the quantity, the amount of finance being raised is larger than other sources, and it's in some sense it's some kind of grant, I would say, also. And so this is one way, but the other thing is also the coaching point. So it's one reason restricting access to finance in Africa is also lack of financial literacy. And even though they have bank account, they may not know how to use it. So, or if they have to go to the bank and ask for, apply for a loan, then they have to know all the formalities and so on. But of course, they have to have a viable project also. So through this coaching, I think WIDU is doing a very good job in giving in integrating the Diaspora. So having a coaching, and so through that, giving to financial literacy, which I think that's also, financial literacy is a very important topic, I think. And you already covered financial capability. It's also, of course, it's only self-rated. But it is, you know, literacy, financial capability is not something you just learn from school only. You need to do it like learning by doing. It's something different that you learn at school and something that you practice it. And for that, getting in the WIDU project, they are in the project themselves, so they are interacting with their coaches, and maybe I don't know how much they were also already interacting with formal banks. That's also another process, so that's another level. So I think this is how we should go in the future, just integrating most projects together. So there were previously projects only on financial literacy, other projects only on remittance in some sense, other projects only on financial capability. And I would add also on aspirations also. So this, maybe that's another topic which was not that much, maybe would have been also interesting to see in this sense, you know, to give the aspirations, that to the sense that they can grow their business together tomorrow. So looking at the success of others, so they try to have forward-looking thinking that they can also grow their business and so on. So I think that these are the coaching and financing are the most important things that from WIDU, I think.
Thank you, and creating a complete ecosystem. Let's go back into that into a second. When you just mentioned, of course, it brings different project types together. Of course, we need to look into the desk, or on the desk of Thomas Helfen from the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, because this project is in its form a very special form and a special approach when it comes to do, in comparison to the very classical development cooperation, to really create incentives also for the diaspora to send money to the countries of origin that would contribute then to both. So, Thomas, maybe you can give us an idea of why did the BMZ decide to, yes, we go forward with the WIDU project, we support that approach that is pretty new to the development industry and the international development sector.
Yes, thank you. Well, indeed, the project is quite unique, and when we want to identify place and time when it came to life, at least to ignite, I would like to mention the BMZ Africa Day 2017. Right from the beginning, we had many meetings between BMZ, GIZ, and the Diaspora. And what was another important event was the Africa FinTech Challenge in 2018. We had an inspiring gathering with members of the African diaspora and innovators from various sectors, including FinTech. Also, the issue of crowdfunding was ventured there. Hence, a major stimulus for the project came from Africa diaspora. So it was brought to us, we were very grateful, because this was very promising. If you look at the huge amount that is flowing from the overseas community back to the home countries, it's really significant. And we received the wish that those who are transferring money to their friends and family want to have it not only for weddings and other important things, but also to make the remittances productive. And by making it productive, make it sustainable. And Manuela mentioned the key word investment. It wasn't a donation, it wasn't a gift, it was an investment. And this is something that was very enticing for us as BMZ, because we had a strong ownership from the diaspora. And also we could reach out to all these self-employed, the small entrepreneurs, the small businesses. And this is something which is quite significant, because you have to walk the last mile. Not only to work on the macroeconomic level, but also to reach out to the people. So it's a people-centered approach of WIDU, which impressed us very much. And we were very happy that even before the official launch of the platform in 2019, more African partners, such as West African business think tanks and the African Institute for Remittances under the African Union, became involved in the project's pilot phase. So we had a lot of strong and significant partners, and we are very happy that it worked out very, very well, and that a key issue and qualification of the program is that it fits very well with the feminist approach to really place emphasis on collaboration, empowerment, leveraging of existing resources within diaspora and local business community. And this is all done with a digital platform. And this allows all very well to reach out also to the informal sector, also to the rural sector. And that's quite unique. So we are very happy that the diaspora community approached us, and that together with GIZ we could work out such a smart design.
But what does it mean when we look into the USP, of course, of WIDU? It's highly digital. We just mentioned and listened to the digital platform. The contracts within the entrepreneurs and and the diaspora it's also very digital. Mobile payments, so it's all, there is no in-between agency in that regard. And of course, it comes back to the ownership of the diaspora. So when we look into these USP factors, and of course the feminist development approach, the feminist development cooperation approach, when it comes to really supporting women and female entrepreneurs, how does this align with the strategy of the BMZ? And what is now a key learning also to take away when we look ahead into the strategic priorities of the BMZ, when we look ahead?
Well, first of all, coming back to the rigorous impact evaluation, it's important for us to have clear evidence whether programs work out for the target group. Yeah. So I'm very happy that the study has been conducted over 3 years and yielded such positive results. And from my point of view, several aspects are very relevant here. First of all, we know that access to finance is one of the key obstacles for MSMEs, and you also touch upon this issue. And this is particularly important for marginalized groups. And the digital platform allows to reach out to the marginalized group. The first important finding for me is the increased share of entrepreneurs who could successfully access formal loans after participation in the WIDU trainings. For example, in Ghana, 58% of entrepreneurs were able to obtain a bank loan after participating in WIDU, compared to 15% of the comparison group. That's a huge difference. This shows that access to financing through local banking is the key to make the start of an MSME a lasting success story. So it's not only whether they can start and kick off, but they have to go on, and to go on and expand, they need loans, especially if the resources from the private family and friends is limited. The second important finding concerns the formalization of businesses, which address another important aspect of our sustainable economic development strategy, because we want to promote formalization. According to the study, the share of tax-registered businesses increased by 15% points, and and by formalization, the businesses, they have better opportunity to get access to bank loans, and also they become taxpayers in their communities, in their countries, which means they can contribute to overall other programs like education, like health, and so on. So it's a multifactorial outcome that shows after successful formalization. The third important finding concerns female entrepreneurship. And it's striking how the gender-specific barriers to entrepreneurship are reflected in this study. The RIE shows the underperformance, or rather structural discrimination, of female entrepreneurs at the baseline compared to the men-led businesses, and how WIDU positively impacted the economic success of women through targeted support. In addition to that, female participants of WIDU reported, these are the indirect effects Manuela presented to us, the indirect effects for women makes them more self-confident. They have a stronger position within their family, and they have a stronger position within the local community. So these aspects are wonderful. So we can create jobs, people are successful with their business idea, they get formalized, they have more and more access to bank loans, and female entrepreneurs are really encouraged to move on, and other women are encouraged to follow this role model. So we are very happy with this design of the project, and we are happy that your rigorous impact evaluation proved this positive effect.
So then, thank you. So then we just hope that, of course, it will continue, as it is obviously a perfect blueprint with all the facts and figures. Before I come back to the role and, of course, the ownership of the diaspora, just I want to bring you in back to Manuela, back into our conversation, because the rigorous impact evaluation, RIE, this is rather the exception, right, within the development world, to have done and to have perceived than the everyday life. Why is that so? Because with all these facts and figures, it is a perfect proof, of course, of sustainability and of a success of a project. But why are RIEs very rare still?
They mostly come from the academic sector to start with. So a randomized control trial is, as I said before, they got the Nobel Prize in 2019. It was largely academics that sort of like brought randomized control trials into the development sector. The issue with that, and there's been lots of studies being done in the global development sector and on Germany, sort of like Germany's development sector specifically, why aren't as many run, and if they're run, why are they not systematically run? So one is obviously budget and timeline. So you need to, in order to do this rigorously, ideally you come in what we call ex post, ex ante. You come in before the treatment has taken place. And that's really difficult. You actually need to do that ideally in the design of the study already. We were very lucky in that we had something called a rolling data collection, because there wasn't a one-time treatment, but because sort of treatment happened continuously, right, as people applied to the WIDU platform, we then could actually go in and still run something that's sort of like second in hierarchy of rigor, which is a difference in difference analysis. So that was great, but I have so many studies of so many sort of like development projects coming to me and saying, oh, can we evaluate this? And then it's ex post, it's too late. We might not really capture the full impact of this. So one of the things that we therefore say needs to happen is a more systematic integration of rigorous impact evaluations. It can't just be the development project itself. I mean, I'm really applauding WIDU here that they commissioned this and they wanted this, but if it's just one-off approaches, it'll never be used systematically. So what actually needs to happen, this is what I mentioned before, FCDO, USAID, and you have this a little bit as well in the Scandinavian aid sector, where it's much more top-down, where it's the ministries, so depending on their structure, sort of like commissioning this, and then you can. They should be in the lead to really dribble it down. They really need to say, look, we want X% of our development projects, specifically pilot projects that are new and innovative, where there isn't enough evidence yet on what works and what doesn't work, to really sort of like systematically implement rigorous impact evaluation. The second step then is to also then really make sure we use the evidence systematically, right? So it's great that we've got this here right now, but how many times do we have a study then that again just goes into a journal publication? And we have a bit of a divide there between then the academic sector, right, and the knowledge that's being diffused there and the applied development sector, because they might not have the access to it. I mean, again, there's people smarter than me who are working on this, there's organizations working on this, but I think specifically in German development cooperation, I see a bit of a barrier still, even though there's so much money being spent, and I think we're the second largest in terms of spending overall, and yet rigorous impact evaluations really aren't systematically being implemented and used yet.
So what would be your call for action? What should be done now with the findings of and the results of the study, that it's not ending up, on some desktops and some files?
I think that's, again, a twofold approach here. So one is obviously the findings of the study, but again, which is very interesting, and I'm sure it's going to have, and I'm hoping it will have an effect on future projects and maybe also the future of WIDU. But I think what, putting on a different hat now, is it should rather flow into a systematic review. So this is what we need actually with like rigorous evidence. We then run a systematic review and see, okay, what's actually working in terms of access to finance, employee growth, etc., across the board. Because as I said before, we can't really extrapolate these findings now and say, look, this is working by and large outside of Ghana and Cameroon, but this is working within the context of this study. So what we need is a systematic review then of multiple of those studies, and this is again where the top-down approach is needed, because it's commissioned, they are happening not just sort of like at random, and this is then when we as sort of like, evaluators, academics can then go in, do a systematic review and say, look, we have an effect size here, overall this is an approach that's really working, and that should then influence again where our money on development policy is being spent, ideally.
I would look. Thank you, Manuela. But I do have my close eye contact with the two scientific other experts here in the room, Yabibal and Olumide. Would you agree or would you disagree, or where would you say, "Oh, hang on, I have a different thought"? First, Olumide, and then Yabibal, please.
So I agree that projects should be evaluated and be done properly, but I think it can also be overdone, and it's been overdone with RCTs for a while. The World Bank adopted it, and it got to the point where, an example of a question, what happens when we give kids food when they go to school? Why should we ask that question? What's the control for that? We don't give some kids food. So I'm basically saying I would caution a bit of care in adopting this as a standard way of, evaluating projects. It's had ethical problems. I remember talking to an academic macroeconomist who was saying, how do development economists get away with this? Because no board would clear some of the projects that eventually got by World Bank. So I'm saying we should do it, but we should also be aware that there are some potential issues with it. Actually, there have been issues with it.
Yeah. What's your take on that? Because, of course, in the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, it's a lot about studies and it's a lot about the approach. How do we measure the impact?
Exactly. We need the evidence, but we should not overdo it. It's also the point. We need, especially at a time where development budget is decreasing, and people are asking whether people were asking, but they are asking now loud, how is our development budget being spent in Peru or in Ethiopia or somewhere? So we have to bring evidence whether it works or not. That's one important thing. And the other thing is we need evidence not only to show whether it works or not, also to see if it doesn't work, how can we improve it, So we started WIDU. And so it's not only about working, does WIDU work or not, but how can we improve it? How can we make it more effective? For that also we need evidence. So we should of course increase having evidence, having studies, but there should be cost-benefit analysis. If you are spending on the study 100,000 and just the actual project is just 50,000, it doesn't make sense, But if on things like this, which could be scaled up, that's what I'm expecting from WIDU, and it was very useful. It was correct also, really, to have the study, because it's something which we can really scale up.
What was impressive to you when you were listening to Manuela, to the facts and figures? Was there something that you as a scientist, was there something that you were like, oh, I have to note that down?
Even the profits, in 6 months, you don't expect such an effect, to be honest. It's just only 6 months. I didn't expect to have the big effect in 6 months. It's just in 6 months you have this much effect, and in 2 years, I would expect much, much higher. And that by itself is, in terms of the income, of course, employment is another issue. You don't necessarily need to have big employment increase, but the income increase, and also I think that's as an economist, I focus more on the income and the profit, but also on their confidence in terms of financial capability. That's also a very, very interesting thing.
Let's go a little bit away from the study side. Why? Because it's a complete different track, and I move our track towards the engagement of the diaspora. Rachel, I come back to you, and then of course to your questions. So please get ready. Microphones, we do have them on the left hand and right hand side. Rachel, when it comes to how do we engage the diaspora in order to drive force also in development cooperation, how to engage the diaspora, the community. What do you think? What is still needed, and what was actually specifically interesting for you, where you've been also surprised, but also maybe disappointed?
Yes, I still think diaspora is quite underutilized. Yeah, so there should be more intentionality in engaging them. Even right here in Germany or countries like Norway, they should be much more involved in development talks, because you will find, like diaspora, we have various groups. We have still the academics from diaspora, we have experts, we have people with a lot of experience, business people, and the like. But sometimes their counsel is not sought. That's why I really like the German approach and this WIDU, because they involve the diaspora, and that's why today we can say that it has been overwhelmingly, the impact can be seen, and the studies have shown that there is something positive. So it's a good example already, and I wish it can be imitated in other countries, even in around Europe, that they can copy this model. So development partners also can be intentional. Apart from at a government level, we have even these other not small organizations, but we have development organizations which almost, they're on the ground, but it's more of some decisions which were made in boardrooms that involve maybe our communities, and we end up with things like something which worked in one country, and because an expert has said it was good, and you find it being replicated in a country in Africa. it's failing. So if the diaspora are involved more, I'm sure there will be less wastage, even in funding. That's what I can say.
Olumide, would you agree, or what's your take on that when it comes to the engagement of the diaspora in a sustainable way, in an honest way within the development cooperation? And, you know, not just invitations for roundtables.
Now you're asking me when I'm on this panel. No, I'm kidding. No, I agree with what you said. I think, I mean, we talk about the fact that diaspora is a resource both for the host country and also for the sending country. And this is one of the ways where that actually shows up very clearly, right? Where they're working together with, you know, WIDU, which is a platform that is run by German Development Cooperation Agency, but that is working, you know, for the entrepreneurs back at home. So I think this shows why the diaspora is a resource for both sides, not just for one side.
But it's still untapped, would you agree? This potential of the diaspora, or would you say, no, we are right on the track?
I am sort of careful to say it's untapped because I know what diaspora do anyway.
Yeah.
Without a platform like this. They send money home. They support their family members. They, you know, help people start businesses. So I wouldn't say it's untapped. I think this is an additional factor to it, and it should be explored.
Thank you. Let's open the floor to your questions. Please give me a hand sign and then tell us, of course, who you are. What I do see you. I just wanted to clarify. We are so curious. Who are you, and what is your concrete question? So we start with the gentleman in the back, and then we come to the gentleman over there. And please give me a hand sign. We have close eye contact, and then it's time for your questions. So please go forward.
Thank you so much. Akinola Hamson from African Council Berlin-Brandenburg. I just wanted to make a point regarding the last question you asked the panel, engaging the diaspora. Thank you so much for, admitting and probably restating the fact that this idea came from the diaspora. And I guess the first thing which is missing when you talk about engaging diaspora in holistic term is, I think, one chair is still missing up there, most especially the perspective of those originally with this idea. I would have loved it if any one of them is sitting up there. That's point number one. Point number two, my dear brother, I would like to engage with you later on. Maybe you can still shed more light into what you mean by financial literacy, which is lacking somehow. So that's another thing, but that's not for the discussion here. And last but not the least, I guess, engaging diaspora, I think should also be seen from the other side of the board. We are talking about the sisters and brothers, our family in Africa, but what about the people here? We have a lot of entrepreneurs living here in Germany, living in Europe, who also have the same challenges you already mentioned, access to finance for their business. And actually, before this platform came to be, the diasporas, most especially the entrepreneurs and businessmen and women, they've been engaging in this for a very long time. So I think talking about what can still be done would be nice if the interests of the diaspora who are into business here, facing the same challenges like those back home, be taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I've especially noted down about, Yabibal, the question about financial literacy. To go a little bit more into that details, what does it mean? As again, it is a big word with a lot of meanings. Please detangle that for us. And then, of course, we need to come into the question of really who needs to be on the stage as well and who's missing. So that would be the next question. I would rather look at it for you, right? So get prepared, but we start with the financial literacy.
Thank you. Financial literacy is a broad term, but to make it very simple, it's about, for example, about understanding what inflation is. it's like for most people, they may not understand that if they put their money just under their pillow, $100, well, in their currency, let's go 1,000 birr, after a year, its value decreases by the amount of inflation, basically. So it's better for them to buy something, a fixed asset, or to invest somewhere instead of putting it under their pillow, or in their bank, if the bank is not paying them deposit rate. So these are small things, or also about being able to calculate dates when they borrow some money at the interest rate of like 5%. What does it mean after 5 years if it's being compounded, something like that? Or what does it mean to have a bank account? That could be the simplest question, actually. What does it mean, a bank account? Does it entail some costs with it or not? So what do they have to do when they transfer and things like that? So these are the things, I think, even in advanced economies, people struggle a lot, of course, about their pension and so on. All these financial services, financial instruments are becoming highly diversified, complex, and people struggle a lot to understand all that. So it is context-specific, but it's a very important competence.
If I could just come in very quickly to add to that.
Hang on, we need your voice a little bit with the microphone, because of course we will not forget the audience online. Now we got it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
if I may come in very quickly. Actually, the way that I heard his question was that this is not a peculiar African problem. It's a problem that is everywhere. I'm trying to teach my kids about money management right now. Most people don't have that skill, and they're resisting it because they want to spend their money instead of save it or invest it. So the point is, I think the framing is often the issue. We're here talking about Africa, so of course we're talking about financial literacy in African countries, but it's not an African problem. It's generally a human problem, but it just gets exacerbated, played up because of the context in which they live.
Maybe we can also phrase it, it's an entrepreneurial problem, a problem of a lot of entrepreneurs when it comes to financial
in African
literacy.
Countries?
Not just in the African context, but also I think
I was
in the
going to say
global
I have
north.
thoughts on that.
No. I've met beautiful and very successful businessmen and businesswomen, especially on the African continent. So I would rather say it's in the whole world. Coming back to who's missing here on stage, right? Diaspora. What's your take on that? And who would you love to see more present on stage when we come to the question of how to engage the diaspora?
I would like him to be on the stage.
He's too shy.
I mean, that's half a joke, but it's actually half serious as well. Because the point is, he's got excellent perspectives on some of the other issues that we don't talk about, which is the other side of the equation. So one thing that a lot of diaspora actors often think about is that everybody's sort of squeezing us. On the ground, our family members are asking us for money. Our countries are creating diaspora bonds to get money from us to invest. The country here is seeing us as a potential resource that could, catalyze investment in the countries. So we often don't think of the fact that diaspora actors here also need this kind of support, right? So that's why I meant that your point was a point that was missing here, and it would have been great if we had someone with your perspective to give that point.
Thank you. So please be on stage next time. Is that a deal? I'd love to have a conversation with you on stage. Don't be shy. I do have two more hands. The gentleman in the back, and then I see you and you. Now we're getting warmed up, right? That was just the icebreaker. Wonderful. So let's start.
So thank you. My name is Laong Gilbert. I am a medical doctor and not someone who's really into business. Working in a hospital. I hail from Cameroon but work and live in Germany. We have heard a lot of coaching, a lot about the relationship between those who are investing from here, the diasporans, and those who are back home. And we have heard a lot of something about investment. Everyone is talking of investment, but we need to specify what do we mean by saying investment. I can say I'm investing in my children by sending them to school. In that way, I'm not expecting any income generation. I'm investing by sending them to school. And one very funny thing is, when I observe Africans, I am a diasporan, part of the diaspora, sending money back home, they send mostly to their families. and they say they are investing in a business with a family. All of us Africans, if I invest 100,000 euros in my family, and this money is squandered for nothing, am I going to sue this guy in the court? And question number 2, who of us is investing in someone in Africa he doesn't know? Just someone in the country, for example in Cameroon, whom you don't know. And is it easier to do business with them and really to invest and to expect some returns from them than to do that with your family? Question mark. So I would really like to know if you have also invested in people who are not in your family. Not to say you are the only one who's doing that way, but I have the experience, and all of us sitting here have the experience.
So I would forward that question to Rachel and to Manuela. Is that okay for you? Rachel, please.
Yes, I've invested in people who are not in my family. That one I can answer positively. And still in the family, and in the issue of whether when we invest, when we spend money on our children's education or relatives, we are investing. And I think when we talk about diaspora remittances going to consumption, most of it also goes for school fees. We have been, like I say, diaspora is most of the time the unofficial social welfare in our society, because without diaspora remittances, I think the situation would have been a little bit different. So in as much as it goes to consumption, it's specifically most of the time for school fees, for medical health care, and such things. And now when we talk about WIDU, we are talking about investing mostly in businesses. And as I already said, that it's really hard sometimes for a startup or a youth without maybe a family that can afford to give them money to start up a business. It's so hard to get funding at times. And with this WIDU funding, I see it this way. Before, if I gave money for business, I would give a certain amount, because even when we live in the diaspora, it's not that we have money without end. It's also limited. You also have to live here. You have to pay your bills. You have to do this. So before we do, if I sent the money, I was funding the whole project by myself. With WIDU now, I can fund at least 3, because the entrepreneur brings in 25%, I bring in 25%, and WIDU backs up. So it is really a big help and a really big push in how we can invest more our remittances towards creating businesses. And also from the coaching part, it's not only for the entrepreneurs there, but that is also another segment of work which has been created. I hope I've answered you well. Okay.
Does this...
If you could compare between investing in your family and investing in someone you don't know, have you any
differences, Rachel?
Differences observed?
Not really, but maybe it's because I have been doing coaching before I fund the people. We've been having discussions and what. So I'm not investing in strangers randomly. It's still people I know. They're not my family, but they're people who come and they can see genuinely they're going to excel. They need this help. Sometimes it's even people who are our employees, that I invest, that I support them so that they can do business on the side with their families. So for me, it's not really a big difference, but it depends maybe on the relationship with family and the rest.
Have there been findings in the study about the relationship when it comes to the entrepreneur and the diaspora supporter?
So it's one of the things that I wish we would have included in the original questionnaire in terms of like the family status of, or the relationship status of the diaspora, and then we would have been able to quantify sort of like what is the effect of the connection on outcomes. We did that qualitatively, and we learned from that when we did a separate study, not a rigorous impact evaluation in Kenya, and we learned from our lack of including that in the questionnaire. I can maybe say a little bit about investment and sort of like the screening that WIDU does indirectly from sort of like other empirical studies. And so one of the things is obviously no matter how they're connected, through the diaspora, already entrepreneurs are being screened for their potential success by who this diaspora selects. And we mentioned a lot access to finance, and actually the empirical studies on access to finance are mixed. They're not always positive in terms of microcredit, for example. Because again, it isn't enough to just give everyone some sort of small amount, but rather sort of like not, and this is maybe the reality, is that not everyone who's an entrepreneur in, let's say, low-income, middle-income countries is an entrepreneur by choice, but rather by lack of opportunities. And so therefore, not everybody is therefore bound to be incredibly successful if they're given access to finance, but rather therefore what WIDU does is screen for a certain level of success already. I think this is why we see also positive effects, unlike in some of the microcredit findings or studies. Secondly, we know, again, putting on my empirical hat here and sort of like from other studies, that the diaspora wants a certain level of control. Some studies have been really interesting randomized control trials about what happens to remittance flows when the diaspora has a bit more of a say over how the money is actually being spent. And we've heard this a little bit here about, you know, it could be towards family purposes, but you sometimes the diaspora doesn't quite know what's happening with the money. And that influences how often they send it, how much they send it. And so again, WIDU provides some sort of screening for what the investment is meant for is actually happening. And that, in other studies, has at least shown can, in the long run, sort of like enhance investments, although here, obviously, what we also want, in the long run, the diaspora doesn't want to keep on sending money over, but wants the business to be sustainable. But it can have interesting effects, and I think, yeah, the screening part of it really matters for the investment.
Thank you. Okay, the gentleman here on the second row, and then I would come to your part. Yeah, you just give me always a hand sign. We start with you. Please be concrete of who you are, and then what is your concrete question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Kennedy Tumenta from African Business Information Bank. And getting back to my brother, we were on this process from the beginning, and I have been on the other side. I went to Africa, stayed there, and see how this project is being done since 2009, from Ghana to Cameroon, and seeing the result. So what I want to say is we need to make sure that we continuously involve the diaspora in this process. And that takes me to Manuela. Manuela, this actually proves something. If we had to use the rigorous assessment process to determine which projects that were supposed to be done, WIDU would never have come up, because we need to give a space where ideas testing comes in, unconventional ideas projects comes in, and then we put them within the process. So we think that rigorous assessments are good for the determination of certain projects to be invested, especially for priority, but we need to open spaces for unconventional ideas and projects to be tested. Otherwise, we will keep on repeating specific projects. I would like to get your ideas from there. I want to bring in something, because I think that Mr. Kneel, during the advisory board, made mentions of the numerous crises that we are facing. A lot of crises, and I think that Dr. Helfen also, we are facing a lot of crises, and we need multidimensional solutions. And I think that here, the diasporas could be double taxed and overtaxed. Let me give this idea. You see, as he rightly said, the governments are expecting diasporas bonds, diasporas sent. Take, for example, diasporas in Germany, which I'm recommending a policy. I don't know how we do this. They give money to their family. They support the development process in the countries of origin, and they still pay taxes in Germany, right? So they are double taxation because they still send this money as hypothetical investment because they have zero return on investment by supporting development programs. At the same time, they pay taxes to the government, natural taxes here. And the last thing is it possible for us to continue this hidden policy which BMZ has once recommended, that we could say if they can support development processes in crisis areas or whatever, this could be tax exempted because we,
So this question goes to Thomas
Yes.
Helfen. Okay,
Exactly.
Kennedy, I would stop. Thank you so much for these two questions. So we would start with the last question to Thomas Helfen, and then we would come back to Manuela when we talk about, of course, the evaluations again and how it kills maybe the creativity of processes. So the order is clear. Thomas, you start, and then we come back to Manuela, and then, of course, it's back to you.
Oh, sorry.
Do we have enough micro? Yeah, wonderful.
So that's a very interesting question. Should we exempt those amounts of money that are transferred for development purposes back home to family and friends for investive purposes? It's highly interesting, and I have to say this idea also came to me some time ago. But I think this would require that we have a more institutionalized system of the diaspora. So it must have some kind of figure. Here we have a development project conducted by BMZ. So they facilitate and leverage individual investments out of the huge diaspora community. But if the diaspora could organize themselves, I think we reach some kind of attention where we can generate public support for this tax exemption idea. I'm fully with you. Thanks again for pointing to this issue.
Mm-hmm. Manuela, when it comes to the design process, when it comes to the start of the ideas, and when it comes to the testing phase, the first testing phase, how does an IIE also maybe kills the creativity in that regard and the space for testing out?
I think it's again coming down to a balance, and it was mentioned before, so maybe the World Bank, whether I agree with that or not, overdid RCTs. I think at the same time, obviously, we need evidence, and we know that neither study is completely actually surveys can generate bias by surveying, and it's a very complex topic. I think it's all about striking a balance. We want to have the evidence, at the same time we obviously want to let the program flourish and see the entrepreneurs flourish. So yeah, how do we strike that? Good question, between generating evidence and
Kennedy,
having the implementation.
You met the pain point.
Run its course.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's just the start of the debate, but thank you for pointing that out. I do have Aida here on this third row. Please give her the microphone, and then I come back to your block. So please be very precise, concrete in who you are and what's your question. And to whom?
Yes, thank you. My name is Ida. First of all, I thought it's time for a question from a woman as well. So,
well, you were the first one that I saw, so but yeah, thank you.
Yes, I'm a part of the WIDU team responsible for our activities in Ethiopia, and I've heard a lot of good things about WIDU, and I like it also because, I know WIDU is great because also I see the entrepreneurs I interact with all the time in Ethiopia. I was hoping also for a few critical voices in terms of what I care about now is how can we make sure WIDU can continue, whether it's the way it is now or differently. And from that perspective, maybe, I don't know, one of the panelists is not directed to anyone in particular, but what do we need to change? What's the one thing we need to change to make sure WIDU can continue from your point of view?
Hello, hello, hello. I'm looking into everybody's eyes. Who wants to start? What's the to-do, so to say, the homework that still needs to be done? That's what I understood. Yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Very important question. I'm originally from Ethiopia, so and I see the challenge from the Ethiopian side. I think it will not be as easy as Cameroon and Ghana we had now because of the gap between the official exchange rate and then the parallel market exchange rate. It's like there's almost 100% difference. So the exchange rate premium is 100%.
But can we change that? I mean, that's not in our hands, the lovely book.
And then that's the question. So we would like to scale up across countries, and then how could this be done. So then there might be an involvement with the Ethiopian government directly in finding a solution for this. So would the diaspora be able to change their remittances in the informal rate, or at least not in the informal, at least something better. Otherwise, the formal rate, if you send 100 100 euros, it's like 6,000 birr. But if you send it through the informal rate, it's 12,000 birr. It's like 100% difference, and that's exactly what the WIDU project, so GIZ or BMZ is matching, basically. So the BMZ matching would not be enough to cover this premium, So there are these kind of challenges that may need also government engagement with and trying to solve this. I'm very interested in this project. I was thinking about, there are a lot of Ethiopians here, how could they solve it? Maybe you can share the challenge from the Ethiopian side. Thank you. I raised maybe only a problem, not solutions.
Yes, please, go ahead. What would you see as a homework, as something that we haven't tackled yet? Because it all looks very nice now on paper, but where is the to-do?
Sustainability.
That's a buzzword. Detangle that for me.
Yes, I'm about to. So when I knew I was going to be on the panel and I was thinking about this, my first question was, so what happens after I've got the training, I've got the money, I can do it 3 times? What happens afterwards? I mean, 3 years is you're just clearing your throat, to get involved in actual work. What happens after that? Is there a provision for that? Is there a sort of peer learning something for that? Is there sort of encouragement of people who have been grantees of the program to work together somehow? Customers, B2B, B2C, whatever. Is there that? Because we know that one of the biggest problems of the informal sector in African countries is that they're highly fragile. The companies, people working there are highly fragile, they're very susceptible to shocks. What happens when a shock happens after engagement with WIDU? I mean, that I think is one of the questions for me. And much more generally speaking, I like WIDU, I like what it does, but I also think we need to understand that it's going to have to be one in an array of tools that we use for this kind of purposes. It's just going to be one. The World Bank's Africa team had a paper out last year, which was sort of saying that 96% of African companies, firms, have less than 5 employees. And it's hard for you to scale with such sizes. And so again, WIDU is gonna have to be one of the tools in the arsenal, in the whatever toolbox, that we as people interested in not just supporting 1 or 2 entrepreneurs, but actually having massive changes across the continent that we're gonna have to use.
Thank you. Okay, I do see you. I just want to play a little bit of ping pong. You're the next on this block. Is that a promise? But I start with the gentleman in the last row that has been holding up his hand for quite a while, showing us his biceps. No, you're number 1, and then I come over to you. Please, tell us who you are, and then your concrete question, and then we come forward.
All right, my name is Moses Akwa. I'm a bit critical and controversial person, so just take it as it comes. I think my question is, with the whole research and studies that was done, if it was to be flipped, to be not done by you, but done by the African, in quotes, will they have the same kind of analysis, or would they also say it's the same? And my question is based on the fact that we see the trend that, of course, it's positive, and I'm not going to say WIDU has been super, super great. I was part of the beginnings, I see that it's been super great. But again, the impact, would it be, and if I would just throw a question to one of our colleagues here and say, do you see those who were the treatment group versus the on-treatment group? is there any major impact in there, or would they say it is just the same? Because, of course, one of the key things is that when there is money, when there is access to something, you see immediate growth. But how do we make sure that it's not just because of that, bump that came up, but it is really sustainable, like he said? So I think for me, my question would be, if we were to analyze it a little bit different from another side, would we get the same kind of result? Would everyone here feel like it is exactly as it is, although we all believe WIDU has been great? And then my last one to add on top is with regards to the fact that we were talking about how we can change WIDU, right? And I see that most of the things that we tried in the beginning has been that I'm a diasporan and immediately goes to close family and relative, which is good. But that actually means also that normally most of the remittances was towards either we are building our own business and that we are helping someone to build a business for us in that sense. But how do we actually ensure that it's not just a remittance that, is just, like you said, not to a family member, but it's a remittance that is actually going towards a business.
Into the ecosystem, so to say. Thank you. Okay, Thank you. I divide that to questions. Rachel, you're going to go with the last question, with the latter question, but I start with Manuela when it comes to the study results from a different perspective, and I quoted here from the African perspective, so please. And also, two of you. Of course, then go ahead. That's wonderful if we're very engaging. So you start, and then we come to Rachel, and then I have one more question of the audience. And then I'm sliding into the networking session in a second. Please.
So I think it is much easier if I answer that for her, because I have read the study, and what she followed is basically what she and her Manuela's team followed is just the standard econometric method of analyzing things. So if I am originally also African, did it, whether she did it, it would have been the same. Of course, differences, but also only on the personal level. So maybe a researcher's personal effect might have some minor effect. It's always understandable. It's just personal traits. The way you do things might change a little bit, but what she followed is the standard process, and I don't think that it would be different if an African did the study.
Moses is shaking his head. Maybe I just want to stick here because I feel the energy here a bit. But please be concrete. Why are you shaking it? Why is it irritating?
Yes, the reason I'm saying that is because, if you look at formalization, for instance, right? If you look at that, the perspective, and all of us here would put a perspective, for instance, to the receiver at the end of the report, how it's supposed to be. Whereas when I look at it from a different perspective, for instance, it might be that in a county or in a country where it's not necessarily I need to register a business, because the people don't even believe in registering a business in the first place, right? So if you take certain parameters in analyzing versus another person, they will look at it differently. The same way I would have questioned, the person who gave you the money, is he your uncle, your relative? Is the business really for you? I know maybe, and I don't know who are the people who did their questions, but Manuela would be careful not to touch certain sensitive things, whereas I would just go straight to the point and say, is this yours, in that sense? So that's why I'm saying that we may have seen some differences as well. And again, I'm not trying to say that WIDU has not been great. It's been super, super great. At least for me, I don't
worry, we don't take it personal. Don't worry, all good. Yeah, we will, please. Or maybe Manuela wants to come in here.
Yeah, I'd love to come in.
Yeah.
So I think there's two processes here. One is obviously the statistical analysis, which is very neutral, but that's the second part. What we do first is designing the questionnaire and designing the questions. And you're right, there could be bias in that. We had the white representation of the team, but we had a largely multicultural team with obviously very strong team members from Ghana, Cameroon. And yet, you're right, the question that we could have asked could have been leading in the sense that something that's maybe interesting from our European perspective that would have been less interesting to you. And we learned, certain things, certain questions that we perhaps didn't think was as interesting, such as the relationship between the diaspora and the entrepreneur. We then learned over time, actually, that could be a really important factor. Why didn't we ask that question? I mean, we're flawed human beings, and we also, we learn as we design studies. But good point. But I think the second part, so just to rephrase that or repeat that, in designing the questionnaire, yes. In the statistical analysis, very, very neutral. I mean, I could have put that through machine learning at some point, and I probably would have gotten the same results. Similar enough, I'd hope.
Thank you. Coming back to the second part of the question, Rachel, when it comes to the support of the support coming from the diaspora towards the entrepreneurs, that it's not only for members of the family, but really broadening up and supporting the whole ecosystem. What's your take on that, and how do you engage in this question?
Okay, yeah, I think anyway it's important that we support more of the ecosystems. Like he has said, that most of the time before we were either giving the money so that our people can build the businesses for us, yeah, but right now, through the WIDU, like I said, it gives me the opportunity, while before, with my own funding, of course, I would support more my direct family. But now that there is extra help, that I can say that if I had just maybe let's take 300 euro that I had to support a business with one business, but now based on the WIDU help, it means I can support also maybe 2 from my family and 1 extra person, because maybe my approach and many others we have been speaking a bit, we are looking more and more Africans are looking at it from a Pan-African perspective, and we are also trying to contribute towards achieving the SDGs, especially the first one, yeah, you know, like no poverty by 2030. So I'm sure with a lot of talks, a lot of people are looking not only supporting their family, but based on that, we are a communal people in Africa, that you're looking also at your neighbor, how you can help them, because I believe even the ones paying school fees or whatever, this money going for consumption, they don't pay strictly only for their family. You will find people are paying also for non-members of their family, and the same way also with business, at least for the people who I know are trying to do the same.
Wonderful, thank you. I have good news and bad news. Bad news, one last question with the gentleman in the second last row. Good news, we do have catering and networking possibility for all your other questions later on. Is that wonderfully bridged? So tell us who you are for the last question, and then a very concrete question.
Thank you very much. My name is Evans Rono. I come from Kenya. And I have 2 comments. And thank you, my brother. You touched about it. One, sustainability and scalability. Mm-hmm. And you touched about attrition rate. Many people are dropping out during the process and getting panned out. And in the last slide, you talked about follow-up study. Mm-hmm. So I would like to have a quick reaction about that part, doing the follow-up study. How can it be done to reveal sustainability and scalability? In the sense that, are you able to find most of these projects which was supported still going on? Have they expanded, or some have collapsed? If you left them when they had 3 employees, will you find some having 6? They have grown. So how can this study be made? And you mentioned that it has to be done properly. How can it be done? What is your reflection about it? And lastly, about my brother touched on it, we invest also in skills, and we will invest in education. And if I give you the perspective from the country where I come from, we also support not only businesses, but most of the time we get requests for support to have someone to come here to acquire skills or to look for a job. And some of the challenges to come to Germany, for example, is the language. Mm-hmm. And some say, okay, I have a plan. Not the business plan, but a plan to acquire skills and look for a job. The only thing that I need is a 6-month course for the language, and I need this amount of money. Can you please add me? I've done that myself. And I give the money, and the person starts learning the language. And I'm very happy. One of them is coming to Germany very soon. And
So help
I
me.
want to live.
What's the question? Help me in that. Finding your question. What is the question that's burning on your chest?
Yeah, the thing is reflecting on the future, scalability, scaling the WIDU. Are you also likely to think about supporting some who have planned to look for a job in diaspora or acquire some specific skills in business area? And at the end, you will have added one more diaspora or two. So you are increasing the number of diaspora, and you have helped the person to get this job and to acquire skills here. So that person will, if you get 10 of them, that this is the WIDU community. They will be expanding to support more people at home.
So it's really also about broadening up and scaling up the WIDU project, but unfortunately...
not only for financial resource, but also the resource to acquire skills.
Yeah.
In person.
That's a tough one, because of course, who's now willing to answer that question as a WIDU specialist, looking into the future? Who can help me here, especially in regard of sustainability and how to scale it up? What the gentleman just mentioned, what would be an option, what is important to be aware of when WIDU comes into the next phase, as we've just listened to the previous years. Rachel, could you help me here? And let's try it. And otherwise, of course, the colleagues here of GIZ, I think that's also directed towards them when it comes to scaling up the WIDU project. Please come in contact with them later on as well. But Rachel, what's your thought?
I think in scaling up, there are some of the things which WIDU can do and look at, but some of the things also we need to realize that there are also other actors who are already in that space. Like, for example, when it comes to people who would like to come to Germany because of jobs and what, I know recently there is a very good cooperation between our president and the German government, and there are people who are going to be coming to work in Germany, almost 200,000 or something. So I think already there are players in that space who are going to do like the language and approach that one. So I think that is a little bit away from WIDU, and I don't think, I hope I'm not wrong, I don't think it's in the scalability part for WIDU. And let me just connect it with somebody before who had also asked something.
To Moses,
it's connected to that, because somebody mentioned about what about the diaspora who are here, how are they being helped even as they help? I think I got something from
Kennedy
that. So also it's important for diaspora to see it's not only WIDU, even within GIZ, there is also a program for that. So we can easily mix up things, and it's not about reinventing the wheel. So I don't think WIDU is going to reinvent the wheel. There are programs which are independent of WIDU, but in GIZ, which diaspora can also have a look at. So I hope I answered the two questions. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. I'm so sorry that it's always the same thing with the time. Time is always running, too fast. But as I mentioned, the good news is we do have time for networking outside, so please use the time. Please give also a round of applause to Dr. Thomas Helfen, Dr. Olumide Abimbola, Rachel Mavakasi Skerpe, Manuela Günther, and Dr. Yabi Balwale. Thank you so much. And we have... Let's leave the stage, because of course we do have closing remarks. Thank you so much for your insights, for also coming into a debate and conversation, but also looking ahead of what is still needed, what are the to-dos, what is the homework. Nevertheless, of course, the gentleman in the last row, please you're kindly invited for our next. No, he's looking away, too shy. No, but you are. do we have? Hang on, I'm still on.
Hello?
Shall I pass? Yeah,
Yes,
perfect.
I think now I'm
Stage
there.
is yours.
Great. So these will be short remarks, but I think still important. Actually, and I would have wanted to ask a last question on what would the experts think about scaling up? What would be the way forward? Has been a huge investment so far in WIDU, and there have been some impact evaluations now on specific parts of it. Good enough to say some things have really gone well, but still there are big questions. How do we take this forward and scale it up in a positive sense? And we have had an advisory board session this afternoon, and we have had now important discussions. And I think it was good to hear that from different perspectives you can see different things in the work of WIDU or diaspora work and so on. So I learned a lot from my perspective on the diaspora. Certainly not enough, but I did some learning. And I'm sure that everybody who is here somehow could learn from another group, be it the German government, be it embassies this afternoon, be it from think tanks, or be it from the diaspora, some things that we need to take on. Now, what I want to say is really, this is a joint venture. And we really need to look at a few strengths of the project to develop it further. I think we can name, again, women performance within it. We can name the digital work and scalability of it. We can name, for sure, the possibly sometimes squeezed diaspora, but still key in making the links and also key for financial contributions. We have to name certainly Germany as a country where the diaspora lives, but also with its government. We need to talk about European partners, where diaspora in France, in Switzerland is working, and we need to for sure talk about, and that's very important, we haven't talked much about it during this symposium. Yes, we talked about it during the afternoon. The role of African institutions, the African Union, and the specific governments and embassies of the countries that are involved. What role can they play to take it forward? And for sure there are roles of giving advice, giving knowledge, innovation, providing political access, providing access to economic opportunities, but there's for sure also the role of really financing, co-financing, and taking it forward. So all this needs to be discussed still, so we have lots of work to do. I just want to assure you that it will be on the agenda, and we will need you in really continuing this discussion and also be a multiplicator for solutions. Well, with these short words, thanks a lot for your presence, for your contributions. The journey continues, and we hope that the latest in 6 months' time for the next advisory board, but I'm sure also with lots of context in between with you, we can have a clearer plan on what we take out of the evaluation and try to scale it up and who can contribute what in that sense. Thanks a lot for your attention. Thanks a lot to the WIDU, GIZ, and also BMZ team. Thanks a lot to the diaspora representatives, to the embassies, and to other partners who joined tonight. Thank you.
Thank you Philip Kneel. Last but not least, I invite you now, of course, for the networking gathering. Thank you also for attending, as I mentioned before, for making time in your busy calendars. I will not get tired of saying that in these times. And also, of course, these are your chairs, so please make use of them and really come into the conversation who needs to be on stage for our debate. Talk to the WIDU people for the next meeting, the next event. As we all know, it's just around the corner. But it's also on us to shape these conversations here on stage, to design the conversations so they just don't happen, but that they're really curated and that they are the right people for the right conversations here on stage. I'm very much looking forward to see you soon, somewhere, sometime. Enjoy the rest of your night, and then I'll see you soon. Looking forward to it. Stay healthy and all the best to you. Thank you for your energy and, of course, for your attention.